Hey guys, how's it going? This is part 3 or a redo of part 3, which is focused on persistent storage. Some new things I added in compared to the old one is that I have hard drive persistent storage. So instead of saving things to just the WebView cache or the WebView local storage, you can save it directly to a path that is defined by you. So it could be in your app data folder or even your documents folder. Okay? So to do this, or if you're from part 2, then you should know that what I've opened up is the template that I've created in a future video. So you should be following the tutorial with this open so that you can get the latest code and you don't have to worry about coding. You can worry about understanding the code, which is what this video is about. These videos are about understanding the code, not just using it. So I used to, or should I say, let me demo this really quickly. So if you want to use the app data, you can just have a setting here. I have a setting there for just that. So it has no path, then there's app data. But for this, since in my recording or when I record this, I was using the documents folder, I'll just show you the documents folder. So over here, you can see that it's saved to the documents folder, and the documents is product name, which is pulled straight from the configuration. And you can do that using some imports in the client side. It's pretty cool, actually. I'm not gonna lie. So it's somewhere here. I forget. I'm blind already. Product name, so it pulls that. Okay. You don't have to worry about setting that if you're using the utilities folder. And the other thing I will add in this video because it's small is how to do notifications. So you could either do notifications natively like this or from React. These native notifications show Windows PowerShell with the PowerShell icon only because I'm running it in development mode. In release, it will show the app name and the app icon. So this stuff, okay? So moving onwards, how do we get started? To do persistent storage, there's two ways to do it. You could either use the local forage or local storage of the web view, so as if it's browser compatible, or you can use the tauri-store so that if you're running the web app in Tauri, then you could use the native features like the file system and save stuff to the file system itself. Okay? So before the video was about local storage, but this one will be about the store. And the code for local storage is available, and it's a bit simpler than what I've done with the tauri-store. So the first thing you need to do is install it. So funny enough, the installation instructions are not clear at all, or not as clear as they could be. And if you followed them verbatim, you would definitely not succeed. Okay? You would definitely not succeed. That's all I can say. So let's tell you or teach you guys how to install a plugin that is not documented well. And I know it might seem like I'm throwing shade, but just know that I'm just bantering around. So how do you install this? Let's install it from the client side first. So you add tauri-plugin-store API, and then you add GitHub Tauri apps, tauri-plugin-store, and then you add the revision, which is just the 7 letters over here. The way they tell you to do it is they give you 5 different ways to install it, which is kind of crazy. And the way to do it from a commit or revision ends up being a copy paste of this, but this might copy a new line. So that's why I recommend instead of doing yarn add, just add it to your package.json, okay? And I'm using this revision only because it's the latest. If you're watching this video, you should probably try using the latest revision, okay? After you've done that, run yarn to install your dependencies, and let's install it or add it to Cargo. So to add it to Cargo, if you are coming from the later videos and you've seen some of the plugins I've used, or even from the last video, I'm not sure when I added some of the stuff in the videos, but for all of these plugins that are official, they usually are released on Git and not tagged. So that means you have to use the Git option in Cargo, and you want to set the branch to either dev or a revision. So for this plugin, I'm using a revision because the plugin is used on the client side more than the backend. And in my opinion, I feel like things could break easily, and things like this are prone to being updated, especially if it's not super easy to use. So that's why you should fix it. But for the other plugins, since they do a simple thing, a simple task that doesn't require much modifications from your end, then it's not really, there's not as much risk in keeping it updated automatically. But over here, since an API is provided, when an API is provided, you want to make sure things are fixed. I know I spent too much time even explaining how to install the app, install the plugin, but that's literally a way less time than the amount of time I broke my head around getting it perfect for you guys. So after we've installed the plugin, let's start coding, okay? So in React, I don't know which framework you guys are using, but I highly recommend React if you are new to front-end development or already know React, I guess. And in React, we use something called useState. And not using state right now, but state is something that is not saved, is not persistent across sessions. So since we want to replace the useState hook with our own hook, we got to make sure that the API is as close as possible to useState. And so we're going to use this store plugin, and we're going to create our own custom hook, or I created my own custom hook, so that I can convert from useLocalForge to useTauriStore very easily. And what this means is that if I wanted to ship my app natively and online and wanted some operating system only features, but with the fallback, then my app would work perfectly. So that's why I have done it this way. You could, if you're just publishing on native to just the desktop, then you don't actually need to include this use localForge. But anyways, let's get started, I guess, coding. So the function parameters is a key, obviously, a default value, and a store name. So what I mean to say when I say obviously is that the structure I'm using is a JSON structure because it's just easy for me and I don't really need to do anything complicated that JSON can't handle. So that's why there's a key and a default value. Okay. And since the scheme of the hook will be basically like useState, and useState triggers a render, we want to make sure that we have our own useState here. And a loading as well, which is true, because store, when you fetch something from the store, it's going to be asynchronous. We also want to use a useRef for a timeout ref, and I know this is really hard to wrap your head around. Like, I learned React 2 years ago, but useRef is something I learned only this year. Okay, but that's mostly because I didn't code in React like every single day of the past 2 years, but useRef is hardly talked about, and it's basically something where you want the value to update but not trigger a render, and that's basically it. Yeah. If you want to keep a value that doesn't trigger a render, that's all I can say. And it doesn't have to be just a value, it could be a component or something like that as well, like a binding or something, but anyways, I'll explain why we need that right now, which is when you save something over here, you may believe that it's automatically being saved to the disk, but that's not true. I am manually calling save. I'm manually telling the store to save. And if I want to save 1 second after you have finished entering things in, I need to use set timeout. But I don't want to call save repeatedly in the same second. So that's why I need to clear the timeout. And the only way to clear a timeout is if you have the timeout reference. Got it? Okay, so moving on to useLayoutEffect. useLayoutEffect is basically something that gets called before the DOM paintings, or gets run before the DOM gets painted. And I've decided to use the layout effect instead of useEffect because this is a synchronous function, so it'll get run pretty quickly. And because it's synchronous or asynchronous, I want that result as fast as possible. If I use useEffect, that means the user could see a UI, and then the data would take a bit of time to update. But if I ensure that the asynchronous function gets called as fast as possible, the user's not going to notice any difference in terms of UI, but the data will show up a bit earlier. Or so that's my logic. I'm not sure if that's correct or not, but that's what I'm going off of, and it worked for me. So what did I do? I'm going to ignore what allow here does because I do not know exactly what it does myself. So let's not worry about the React semantics here, just the core code, which is the store. So you want to get something, and if the value exists, set the state to that value. And if it doesn't exist or some error occurs, then we want to basically make sure that we set the default value to the store. And then we set the timeout to save a second later. Or you could save it just now. It really doesn't matter. Okay, over here, this is optional. If you want to store null values, then comment this out. Okay. And down here, we will use a use effect because we want to track when state changes. If the user is updating the state from their component because they're treating it like a use state, then as we intend as a hook, then we want to make sure that when the state gets updated, we also update the store. So that's why we use use effect. And we make sure that the store isn't loading, because if the store is loading and we call store.set, we may do something really bad. Like we might break something and like overwrite data that the user had. And that's not a good user experience. It would be really annoying. And I feel like at the beginning of my journey in this app, I made that mistake when I started coding and I ran into that problem really quickly. So that's why there's a guard here. Okay? First thing you do is clear the timeout because as I said earlier, and then we just do the same thing as over here. Got it. And I believe there's a get store as well that I did not explain. So over here, I have a store variable and I call get store from the store name. So why did I do this? It's because I don't want to create a new store every single time for the same file name. That's not how they do it in the Rust backend because I looked at that source code. So you just keep track of a global stores dictionary or hash map and just use and cache the store so that you're not doing anything weird, because you might do something weird if you create two stores for the same file. That's bound to cause problems. If you're not doing something correctly, it's going to cause problems. Okay, so I have explained that, but that's only how to use it. How do you get something like a path to a file that's not in your app directory? And I know I yawned, so I'm sorry about that. So how do we make sure that we are not bound to the app directory or app data directory? Because clearly this is not a user-friendly path. The app data folder is hidden. So this is not a user-friendly path. We don't want to make sure the user should not be opening or even looking at this folder ever. That is good user experience, is making sure that the user does not have to open this folder ever. So what do we want? Well, we want the user to use their documents folder. So if we go to the documents folder, we can see that, or this isn't the documents folder, but it's a subdirectory. We can see that there's many apps over there. Like, I think I don't have anything weird on here. I'm not sure. So as you can see, okay, I guess you can see, I got some games here, but I guess that is. Okay, you know what? Maybe it is embarrassing. So as you can see, there's like GitHub here as well. So, and even Overwatch, even though I don't have Overwatch installed. So, oh yeah, there you go. You can see 2018. I had that installed 4 years ago. So over here, I have product name. So this is just the default Tauri configuration. And here's the file. So how do we get access to this file? How do we get this file path? And we need to access what the documents directory is, right? And as well as the app name. So I will explain how to get the app name first, which is very simple. You just import the Tauri configuration and then use the product name, okay? If you are insecure or if you are worried about exposing your configuration file or your package.json file, then for the version, then you can hardcode that yourself. It's really up to you, but in my opinion, I don't like to remember updating a single variable in two spots, okay? In my Musiccaster Python app, I had my build command update the versions of the other files that were hard coded. So that's how serious I take the mantra of automation, or mantra of not hard coding things in more than one places. Okay. So that's how you get the app name. But how do we get the documents folder, and how do we get the file separator? Because what if you're on Windows and you don't know if a single slash will work, right? A single slash does work, but I like to, what if you want to show the user what the path is, then obviously it's going to look weird. So if you want consistency, you need to make sure that you know what the file separator is as well. You can see that I call useTauriContext and I just pull it from there. But useTauriContext is something I created. So let me explain what I did there. All this stuff might seem new, like I know I didn't explain any of this, but that's for another video, you'll see. And if you're from the later parts, you already watched that video. But for the new people that just don't worry about it too much, the only thing that's really important is these notification, which I just went over right now. Notify and show notification. So you just use the browser or the library. It's really simple. Okay, so let me explain this context really quickly. React context is something that you use if you want to have a global state accessible from any component underneath a certain level. Okay? I think that was clear, but I will explain it a bit more now. And how is that relevant to Tauri is that Tauri APIs are all asynchronous. And since the documents folder is not going to change when you are coding, or hopefully it's not going to change often while you're doing stuff, then, things will be fine. Yeah. So then you probably want to use a context or something, right? Okay, so yeah, okay. So because things might not change that much, then you could use a context to take care of everything. And this avoids using a hook every single time you use the Tauri context, all right? I'm not too sure anymore that this is a good idea, because maybe it is possible that the documents directory and the downloads folder will change while a user is using their computer. I've just assumed that it won't, okay? And I definitely know that the operating system is not going to change while you're coding. So let me just explain this really quickly. I'm using context to do that. So over here, I have some default values, but it's mostly just for documentation and defaults so that you can get autocomplete. So you can tell the consumer what's available if you want to, suppose you have multiple programmers on a team and one person's responsible for the APIs and one person's responsible for the UI, then you do it this way. So we have the downloads in the set download directory, documents for set downloads, so you just use state for everything. And then here's the main part, which is if you're running in Tauri, which is another variable, just that simple. If you're running in Tauri, then we want to create a function called call Tauri APIs, which is an asynchronous function. And we basically run call Tauri APIs.catch console.error. And that should be everything, okay? That should be it. And yeah, we just said everything. I guess the other thing is that even if the user changes their download or their documents folder, something will, you probably already have a file open, so it doesn't really matter anymore. And hopefully OneDrive will take care of everything. All right? And all you have to do to return a context is return so the context.provider. So you just return the provider and its values is this stuff, okay? So this is actually what's accessible when you use Tauri context. This is what's accessible in the real world and not this. This is just the default values, or that's how I believe, yeah, okay? And I've made it really pretty or friendly so that it looks really nice. And to make sure it works, go to your providers folder, which is a boilerplate component I have. and just add it to the list of providers here. All these providers are global, and so that's why I've added it to providers.jsx, but even Tauri is a global in my opinion, but sometimes you might create a context that doesn't need to be used everywhere, but only for a specific route, I guess. So if you had like 4 routes over here and only one of them needed some sort of global variables, then you shouldn't have the provider up here, but rather down there. And of course, if you run into performance issues at some point, you might have to do prop drilling or whatever. But that's not really important to the video right now. And yeah, just do tauri provider and everything will be taken care of, because if you have coded things right, like children over here, which is a prop, then things will work out perfectly. I've added a note here so that you are not constrained to what I've written, but that you could write anything you want. Okay? And I've noted that you should only call things here that are going to be static. Okay? If something's going to be dynamic, like the number of files in a folder or the files in a folder, you shouldn't do a static thing. You should do something that can be called to update or something. So something dynamic, or a more dynamic solution, I should say. And I believe I've added all of that information. I've told you everything. If you want to make sure that your code is secure, you can show the UI on a conditional that the app is loading or not. That's what you can do instead. Okay? So let me run through everything again. I have shown you how to use the store plugin so that you could write to files in a structured manner, read and write to files in a structured manner. And what else? Oh yeah, if you want to do it in a browser compatible way, I've added that features as well. You can just copy paste that. How to pull from the configuration files, and how to use a context so that you don't have to write use effect in every component, in every child component. Okay? I hope this video was really useful now, instead of just the older video, which I wasted a lot of time on. This video was filled with straight to the point. So I hope you guys enjoyed it.